At that same news conference, President Obama said the Constitution is clear and that he intends to move forward with selecting a nominee to replace Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. Scalia died over the weekend while on a hunting trip in Texas. His death has sparked a political battle on Capitol Hill, with GOP lawmakers insisting the nomination should be left up to the next president. President Obama said Tuesday he will nominate someone who is indisputably qualified for the seat and urged Republican senators to rise above politics.
The Constitution is pretty clear about what is supposed to happen now. When there is a vacancy on the Supreme Court, the President of the United States is to nominate someone. The Senate is to consider that nomination, and either they disapprove of that nominee or that nominee is elevated to the Supreme Court. Historically, this has not been viewed as a question. There's no unwritten law that says that it can only be done on off years. That's not in the constitutional text. I'm amused when I hear people who claim to be strict interpreters of the Constitution suddenly reading into it a whole series of provisions that are not there. There is more than enough time for the Senate to consider in a thoughtful way the record of a nominee that I present and to make a decision. The fact that we've almost grown accustomed to a situation that is almost unprecedented, where every nomination is contested. Everything is blocked, regardless of how qualified the person is, even when there's no ideological objection to them. Certainly where there are no disqualifying actions by the nominee that have surfaced. The fact that it's that hard that we're even discussing this is, I think, a measure of how, unfortunately, the venom and rancor in Washington has prevented us from getting basic work done.
Margaret, Brennan is traveling with the president in Rancho Mirage, California. Margaret, what do you make of the president's remarks?
Well, Elaine, it was clear from the president's tone and the directness of his answers to any questions about the Supreme Court that he is ready for what appears to be an impending fight with Congress to get his nominee confirmed. The president really didn't mince words on this, saying this shouldn't be about politics. The Constitution mandates that the president picks a candidate, sends him up for confirmation by the Senate, and that just because this is a presidential election year shouldn't change that. He said the Constitution is clear and that the Congress should consider whoever he sends up because they will be well qualified. He really swatted away a reporter's question about whether the president was going to make this pick along ideological lines.
Margaret, the president was also questioned on the Democrats, including the time that he spent as a senator not confirming George W. Bush's nominees. Didn't he essentially do the thing now that, of course, Republicans are being accused of doing?
Well, the president was asked that question about what happened back in 2006 when you, as a senator, voted to filibuster President Bush's nominee, the candidate being Samuel Alito, who the president, then a senator at the time, really said he had problems with on his politics and saying he was bad for the country. So in some ways, the president acknowledged that there were some political motivations in saying it, did not directly answer the question of why he voted the way he voted at the time. But he more broadly opened this up, saying, look, this really right now should be a case where Washington works together to confirm someone who I'm going to send up who's going to be, as he said, impeccably qualified for the job, that this shouldn't be about their ideological bent. This shouldn't simply, before a nominee has even been named, rejected out of hand, which is what congressional Republicans are saying at this point. He's saying at least give my guy a fair shot. I may not have liked the last appointee, but frankly, Congress, I haven't even told you who I'm sending up, so you can't reject them without knowing details.
The president also pointed out that Justice Kennedy was confirmed during Ronald Reagan's last year in office. Here's what he had to say.
Justice Kennedy, when he was nominated by Ronald Reagan, in Ronald Reagan's last year in office, a vote was taken. And there were a whole lot of Democrats who I'm sure did not agree with Justice Kennedy on his position on a variety of issues. But they did the right thing. They confirmed him. And if they voted against him, they certainly didn't mount a filibuster to block a vote from even coming up. This is the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land. It's the one court where we would expect elected officials to rise above day-to-day politics. And this will be the opportunity for senators to do their job.
Margaret, given what we know, some lawmakers have already said, what do you think the reaction to that is going to be?
Well, the reason the president used that example of Justice Kennedy is because the administration is trying to argue that history is on their side. You've had this argument put out there by Republican presidential candidates that because the president's in his last year in office, not technically a lame duck, though they refer to him as such, just in his last year in office, that he doesn't have the right, that he should wait, that the next president should pick the Supreme Court justice. So he's really trying to use that example historically to take apart what he sees as a straw man argument. He's saying the Constitution's absolutely clear. I have to pick someone and do it relatively soon.
What is the president's strategy here if he's already hearing from some Republicans saying that they're not even going to necessarily consider, even before he's named a nominee, what kind of political maneuvering is even possible for the president in his last year in office?
The White House is already making calls to both Democrats because there is pressure to pick a very liberal nominee, and Republicans because there's pressure just, to sort of lay back and not move forward, and saying, listen, you got to give this nominee a free shot at the office and consider them on their merits, not on their ideology, or frankly, don't reject them just because you don't like the White House policies at this point. You can't leave a Supreme Court seat vacant. You're going to hear that from the White House a lot, that it's irresponsible to leave Justice Scalia's seat unfilled because there are so many important decisions to still be made by the court this year. So this is something that the president will argue should be above politics, if there is anything that can be above politics in Washington anymore.
Yeah, right. That's a difficult question, certainly shaping up to be a tough battle already. Margaret Brennan for us. Margaret, thank you.